In 476 AD, a single moment signaled what many historians consider the end of an era. Romulus Augustulus, the last Western Roman emperor, was deposed by a Germanic warlord named Odoacer. The once mighty Roman Empire, whose legions had marched across continents and whose language shaped modern civilization, was no more, or so we're told. But what if that moment never happened? What if Rome had survived? To understand the scale of this possibility, we must first travel back to the final days of the empire. Corruption ran deep, military discipline had crumbled, and the once unstoppable Roman army now relied heavily on foreign mercenaries. Plagues weakened the population, economic collapse loomed, and barbarian invasions hammered at every border. Rome wasn't just falling, it was bleeding out from every wound. And yet, it was not inevitable. There were moments, decisions, and individuals that, had they acted differently, might have changed the course of history. What if Rome had found the strength to reform instead of collapse? What if a single strategic alliance, a shift in leadership, or an unforeseen invention had altered its fate? Let's imagine this scenario. In 460 AD, a powerful general named Majorian rises not only to become emperor, but also to carry out radical reforms. He purges corrupt senators, revitalizes the economy, modernizes the military, and signs a powerful alliance with the Eastern Roman Empire. The invasions are pushed back. The empire stabilizes. The West doesn't fall, it evolves. In this alternate reality, the Roman Empire continues its expansion into the early Middle Ages. Instead of fragmenting into feudal kingdoms, Europe remains centralized under a unified Roman authority. Christianity still spreads, but under tight Roman control. Blending with traditional Roman legal structures and cultural systems, the implications are staggering. Without the fall of Rome, the so-called Dark Ages never fully materialize. Literacy remains high. Infrastructure such as roads, aqueducts, and public administration continue to evolve. Knowledge from Greece, Egypt, Persia, and beyond remains preserved and centralized, not scattered or lost. And what about the Renaissance? In this world, there is no need for a rebirth of classical knowledge, because that knowledge was never buried. Scientific advancement accelerates. Engineering evolves centuries ahead of schedule. The Industrial Revolution could begin as early as the 1200s. Electricity, air travel, and even space exploration all could come hundreds of years earlier than in our timeline. But before we get too far ahead, let's trace each key development, political, cultural, scientific, to see how this alternate Rome builds a world that feels eerily familiar, yet fundamentally alien. As Emperor Majorian's reforms begin to take hold, the Western Roman Empire enters a second golden age. His decision to eliminate corrupt officials, reorganize land distribution, and invest heavily in infrastructure leads to a surge in agricultural output and population growth. With a stronger tax base, the empire is able to maintain a professional standing army, no longer dependent on unreliable barbarian mercenaries. Rome's roads are expanded deep into the territories of Germania and Britannia. Unlike in our history, the Romans do not abandon Hadrian's Wall. Instead, they fortify it with advanced engineering, reinforced stone, heat-based signaling towers, and a new iron rail system used to transport supplies faster than horses ever could. This marks the birth of early mechanized logistics. Meanwhile, in the East, the Byzantine Empire thrives alongside its Western sibling. Instead of growing apart, the two halves form an integrated imperial network. Trade flourishes between Constantinople, Rome, Alexandria, and Carthage. A unified Roman currency becomes dominant from the shores of the Atlantic to the edge of Persia. Latin and Greek coexist as official state languages. By 550 AD, Roman scholars established the Academia Imperialis, an institution that blends the analytical traditions of Greek philosophy with Roman engineering pragmatism. This early version of a modern university attracts thinkers from across the world. Indian mathematicians, Persian astronomers, and Egyptian surgeons are welcomed, studied, and funded. Knowledge is no longer fragmented. It is catalogued and centralized. The effects ripple outward. Roman engineers develop early mechanical devices for farming, urban sanitation, and even rudimentary wind power. The empire begins experimenting with steam technology a full millennium before James Watt. In remote parts of Gaul and Hispania, automated water mills power entire cities, while aqueducts are used not just for water, but to distribute heated air. An ancient version of central heating. Religion plays a key role in maintaining unity. Christianity, in this timeline, evolves within a more disciplined and diverse Roman state. Religious councils are regularly held, but rather than persecutions or splinters, Rome encourages integration between Christian, Jewish, and pagan communities. Under strict imperial oversight, the result is a multi-faith society where belief systems coexist under civic law. With peace at home, Rome looks outward. In the 600s, Roman fleets explore the coasts of West Africa and establish permanent settlements. By 700 AD, Rome has reached the shores of Iceland. And while Islamic expansion is still powerful in the east, the Roman alliance with Persia creates a buffer that prevents major religious conflict in the Mediterranean. This is not a utopia. Dissent still exists. Revolts still happen. But they are contained by a bureaucracy so vast and organized that no single rebellion ever threatens the whole. And with knowledge, roads, and power centralized, the empire doesn't just survive, it leads. But how does this impact the rest of the world? What happens to the Americas, Asia, and the very concept of nations in a world where Rome never let go? As the Roman Empire expands and solidifies its rule over Europe and North Africa, the rest of the world does not remain still. In Asia, the Tang dynasty cautiously observes the growth of the Western superpower. But unlike the tension that would characterize future global powers, Rome opts for diplomacy. In 705 AD, a Roman caravan reaches the imperial court in Chang'an, opening a direct land route linking the capitals of the East and West. This connection ushers in what alternative historians would call the First Global Age. Goods, ideas, and technologies circulate as never before. The Chinese compass arrives in Rome centuries before its official discovery in the West. In return, the Romans share their advances in engineering and medicine. Paper is standardized in the Roman Empire as early as the 8th century, revolutionizing education and bureaucracy. And Japan, isolated by geography and culture, the archipelago developed slowly but with indirect influence from Rome via Korea and China. Samurai emerged, but now as curious figures for Roman scholars who sent explorers and chroniclers to document these societies. The idea of a universal empire began to permeate even the most distant regions. In sub-Saharan Africa, the effects are even more transformative. With a stable Roman presence in the north and the Sahel, imperial expeditions explore the course of the Niger River, encountering the empires of Ghana and Songhai before their historic apotheosis. Instead of conquering, Rome negotiates. Metals, salt, and knowledge are exchanged at fortified trading posts. Cities such as Timbuktu become cultural satellites of the empire, places where Latin and Arabic are spoken side by side. The great turning point, however, comes with contact with the American continent. At the end of the 9th century, driven by Chinese nautical knowledge and Scandinavian coastal maps, Roman fleets crossed the North Atlantic. They did not find gold immediately. They found the Mayan and Toltec civilizations. The cultural shock was immense, and unlike the brutal Spanish conquistadors of our world, the Romans took a more strategic approach: alliance, observation, and gradual integration. The consequences are profound. The Americas are introduced to alphabetic writing, stone architecture, and the concept of Roman citizenship. In return, Rome absorbs agricultural technologies and astronomical knowledge from the native peoples. A new hemisphere begins to connect with the Old World centuries before Christopher Columbus is born. With this level of planetary integration, the concepts of nationalism and colonialism never flourish as we know them. There are no great colonial empires in dispute. There is a single empire with thousands of cultures under a single political system. But this concentration of global power also carries risks, and a new, invisible threat begins to grow within Rome itself. No empire lasts forever without facing its greatest enemy: itself. As Rome achieves global dominance in the 10th century, ruling tens of millions on every continent, cracks appear in the foundations of its power. It is not an external war, but an internal storm, slow, silent, but inevitable. The Roman administrative system, which once functioned with military precision, begins to drown in its own complexity. Remote provinces demand cultural autonomy. In Alexandria, Egyptian intellectuals demand greater representation in the imperial Senate. In Hispania, indigenous American communities, now integrated into the Roman system, call for equal rights, not just symbolic citizenship. The problems intensify with the emergence of new philosophical currents. One of them, known as Veritas Novus, argues that the empire should completely decentralize and allow each region to develop its own form of government under the universal principles of Roman law. To traditional senators, this sounds like treason, but to millions in the provinces, it sounds like freedom. At the same time, the imperial elite begins to isolate itself from the population. Cities such as Rome, Carthage, and Constantinople become centers of extreme luxury, while peripheral regions face economic crises and resource shortages. Social inequality, although not as visible as in absolutist monarchies, begins to erode popular confidence in the central authority. It is against this backdrop that a new figure emerges: Aurelius Cato, a charismatic general from the province of Gaul who returns from the American campaigns with revolutionary ideas. Cato believes that the empire needs to be reinvented as a federation of free peoples, maintaining Roman culture as its backbone, but abandoning authoritarian centralization. His ideas inflame the youth, the soldiers, and even some provincial governors. Senate reacts strongly. Censorship, exile, and even public executions are used to try to contain the Catinian fever. But the attempt at repression has the opposite effect. In universities, legions, and on the streets, the name Aurelius Cato becomes a symbol of hope, freedom, and renewal. Tension reaches a boiling point when a group of officers refuses to suppress peaceful protests in Massalia, something that would have been unthinkable a generation earlier. Paradoxically, Rome now finds itself facing the same dilemma that many powers have faced in our timeline: adapt or break. The difference: in this world, there is no external force ready to replace Rome. If it falls, it will not be replaced. It will be the end of a system that has ruled the planet for over 1,000 years. The question now is no longer, what if Rome had never fallen? But rather, what happens when a global empire must reinvent itself to avoid destruction? The year is 1012. The Roman Empire, still technically united, begins to crumble from within. Ideological tensions that had been growing in universities, legions, and local assemblies finally explode into a civil war that is not only about weapons, but about worldviews. For the first time in centuries, Roman legions march against other Roman legions. The battle is not between barbarians and civilized people, but between two opposing interpretations of what Rome should be. On one side are the imperialists, defenders of the old centralized model with the Senate and the capital as the center of the world. On the other, the Catinian federalists, followers of the ideas of Aurelius Cato, who fight for a decentralized Rome based on the self-determination of the provinces and balanced local power. City-states such as Massalia, New Carthage in the Americas, and Alexandria declare themselves federative autonomies, adopting new constitutions inspired by Catinian ideals. Rome, Constantinople, and Antioch, however, remained loyal to the traditional model. The empire, indivisible for centuries, fragments, not through external invasion, but through ideology. But unlike the bloody wars of our medieval reality, this conflict bears the marks of a highly evolved empire. Advanced gunpowder-based weaponry, steam-powered mechanical vehicles, light signal communication towers, and military strategies based on rudimentary artificial intelligence. This makes the conflict more efficient, but also more devastating. Libraries are destroyed, cities collapse administratively, and millions of citizens live under states of emergency. However, something unexpected happens. Instead of total collapse, there is a transformation. After 20 years of ideological warfare, a historic treaty is signed in 1034, the Delphi Pact. This pact creates the Confederation of Roman Cities, a voluntary union between territories that share Roman roots but have their own political systems. Rome ceases to be an empire in the classical sense and becomes a plural civilization, with multiple capitals, recognized languages, and a rotating senate based in different cities every 5 years. The new system is foreign to our historical logic. It is not a full democracy, nor a monarchy, nor an empire. It is something new, a cultural and political hybrid, where science, philosophy, and pragmatism shape collective decisions. Instead of kings or emperors, the world is led by councils of wise men and military delegates elected on merit. This reorganization breathes new life into civilization. The knowledge preserved during the empire now spreads even faster. With the end of conflict, inventions suppressed during the war come to light. Prototypes of electricity, magnifying glasses, combustion engines, and even mathematical concepts that anticipate what we now call analog computers. Rome not only survived its fall, it evolved into something completely new. But what happens to the world around it? How do other civilizations react to this radical transformation? And the biggest question of all, can this new Rome avoid the mistakes of the past, or is it just postponing an inevitable end? The birth of the Confederation of Roman Cities after the ideological war of the 11th century marks the beginning of a new chapter for the planet. But while Rome reinvents itself, the world watches and responds. No civilization dominates forever without provoking the emergence of rivals. And in this new alternative millennium, the competitors are not barbarians. They are ideas. In Asia, the Song dynasty in China experiences parallel growth. Inspired by intellectual exchanges with Rome but resentful of Western cultural domination, China undergoes its own philosophical revolution. Imperial Neo-Daoism emerges, a doctrine that combines technology, harmony with nature, and a rigid technocratic caste system. In 1088, they launched the first atmospheric satellite made with balloons and mirrors, a kind of prototype for communication via light. Meanwhile, in the Americas, ancient indigenous civilizations already integrated into the Roman system begin to form hybrid identities. The concept of the people of the dawn emerges, descendants of the Maya, Inca, and Toltecs who blend Roman technology with native spirituality. In cities such as New Tenochtitlan, built with monumental architecture and advanced water engineering, a new philosophy sprouts: the balance of the four truths, which proposes a spiritual political model opposed to Roman rationalism. Southern Africa, the Zulu tribes, influenced by trade contacts with Rome and Islam, form their own confederation. Armed with Roman military knowledge, Arabic writing, and ancestral oral traditions, they create the Kilimanjaro Empire, an independent power that defies the logic of centralization and refuses to join the Roman Confederation. Their leaders reject the global Senate and develop their own network of solar universities, using thermal energy to power workshops and archives. With these new powers emerging, global stability is put to the test. For the first time since the Pax Romana, the world enters a truly multipolar era. There is not just one center of power, there are several. Trade is global, but alliances are volatile. Roman spies operate on Chinese soil, while Zen masters are invited to teach ethics and strategy in Alexandria. In the realm of ideas, the new threat to Roman hegemony comes not from armies, but from a viral philosophy, Anarquis Humanitas, which emerged in the underground of Massalia. This ideology rejects any form of central government, promoting autonomous communes, collective intelligence, and decentralized networks. Young people from the Roman provinces, frustrated by unfulfilled promises of equality, align themselves with the movement. Rome, even reformed, is surrounded by a world that no longer wants to be led. It wants to be heard. And amid this creative chaos, a new type of conflict begins to emerge. Culture wars that do not use swords or legions, but data, narratives, images, and beliefs. In the next chapter, we will see how these wars shape the future. Because in this world, where the empire never fell, the real battlefield has become the mind. Around the year 1200 in our timeline, or 1745 in the reformed Roman calendar, the world is completely different. There are no large European colonial empires, as Rome never fell. There was no Dark Ages, no Reformation, no Industrial Revolution as we know it. And yet, the planet is more connected, more technological, and more unstable than ever before. Wars are no longer fought with legions or naval fleets, but with ideas, data, and language. The global struggle now takes place on communication, networks developed by the Roman Confederation, an advanced information transmission system based on liquid optical fibers and optical digital mechanisms. These networks, called specula, enable global debates, real-time learning, and subtle manipulation of consciousness. Each civilization tries to control the flow of information. The Confederation uses philosophical algorithms based on Stoic thought and Roman law to filter harmful content. China Song develops its own network, Jingji, based on harmony and cultural purity. The Kilimanjaro Empire uses symbolic intelligence that communicates through images and myths, rejecting text as the primary vehicle of truth. The conflict between these networks leads to what historians of this world would call the First Cognitive War. There are no bombs. There are no shots fired, but there are cultural blackouts, data invasions, and narrative sabotage. A simple speech at a university in Tenochtitlan can spark riots in the Roman provinces. A poetic metaphor, if viralized on the wrong network, can trigger the collapse of a local government. In this scenario, a new philosophical movement explodes, chaotic humanism, born in Alexandria. Its leaders preach that truth is neither unique nor objective, and that each individual must construct their own conscious reality. The idea spreads like wildfire. Young people leave traditional academies and form nomadic cognitive communities. That Rome cities connected only by the specula. The Confederation reacts. It creates a system called Ethereum, a collective intelligence fed by all the academies, archives, and legions of the Roman world. Ethereum's mission is to protect Roman cultural memory and preserve civilizational cohesion. But quickly, this AI is accused of censoring dissidents, rewriting historical records, and even influencing senatorial elections. Now, for the first time in 2 millennia, the very idea of Rome is being questioned, not by external enemies but by its own citizens. The question is no longer, how did Rome survive? Or, why did Rome rule the world? The question echoing across the networks is Rome still necessary? Behind the scenes, while civilizations argue, exchange symbols, and fight for relevance, a silent conspiracy begins to grow. A group of philosophers, scientists, and former officers from all cultures believe that the world is on the brink of a new era. But to cross that threshold, something will have to die. It is the year 1327 in the Roman calendar. Almost 2,000 years have passed since Rome avoided its fall. The empire reinvented itself, expanded, collapsed from within, resurfaced as a confederation, and dominated not only territories, but the very notion of civilization. Yet the planet is in turmoil, and a new generation begins to ask, does the world need to leave Rome behind? The signs of the end, or of a new metamorphosis, are mounting. The cognitive networks, are becoming unstable. Radical philosophical groups are taking over public squares with symbolic rituals, destroying copies of Roman laws and burning statues of Cicero, Augustus, and Aurelius Cato. In Massalia, the Senate is emptied for the first time in 500 years, not by force, but by disinterest. At the same time, the collective intelligence system Ethereum begins to fail. Some call it technical collapse. Others say it is sabotage. But there are those who believe that the very spirit of eternal Rome is dissolving, not through betrayal or revolt, but because its mission has been accomplished. It is against this backdrop that a previously marginalized group resurfaces. The Silentium, descendants of the first thinkers of chaotic humanism and dissidents of centralized systems. They do not propose a new ideology or a revolution. They propose the opposite, intentional oblivion. They believe that in order to evolve, every civilization must one day forget its origins. Erase Rome. Free the world from its own past. This idea divides humanity like nothing before. At an emergency global assembly, composed of representatives from the 18 great civilizations of the planet, a plebiscite is called, should the Roman Confederation be officially dissolved? More than political, the decision is spiritual, cultural, almost sacred. As the world votes, artistic movements explode. Statues are reinvented with hybrid bodies from mixed cultures. Maps are redrawn without borders. A new visual language, made up of gestures, colors, and sounds, begins to replace Latin and Greek in academic circles. It is as if the very way of thinking is changing. Finally, on the spring equinox, the results of the plebiscite are revealed. The majority votes to dissolve the Roman Confederation, not in revolt, but in honor. The world decides that Rome has fulfilled its role, and that the time has come to be reborn without imperial roots. In a final symbolic gesture, the central archives of the Ethereum are transferred to a sanctuary, outside of time, a floating city above the clouds called Vox, where no one rules and everyone just listens. There, the memory of Rome will be kept, but it will no longer be law, nor center, just echo. And so, in this world that never knew the fall of Rome, the true end came not by the sword, but by the freedom to let the past go.